it's a very, in Tafshir Chaf Aleph, 1961, was Shevat was Shabbos. So the Rebbe said a mimer on the 11th chapter. Each chapter corresponds, each year, the Rebbe would say a mimer corresponding to the 20 chapters of Basar Legani. So Tafshir Yud Aleph began the beginning, and then Tafshir Yud Beis, chapter 2, Tafshir Yud Gimel was chapter 3. In 1961, Tafshir Chaf Aleph was chapter 11. So the Rebbe said a mimer before Kegavna, in the middle of davening, Ma'ariv. The Rebbe sat down and said a mimer chassidus that Friday night, and then he said the same mimer, or with changes, Motzei Shabbos. There was a fabring of Motzei Shabbos. Shabbos, he also said a mimer, Vahi b'shalach, some of the themes. So this mimer is a very profound mimer. And I wanted to just share with you a thought on that very much, this helps understand some of the ideas that he's saying here. And this can help understand that Perek. Yet last night in my program, My Life, I spoke about it as well. A lot of people wanted me to sum up what that mimer says, so check it out. But here's the main point I want to say. This chapter 11 speaks about Tzivus Hashem. Frierdiker Rebbe is chapter 11. Why the Eden are called Tzivus Havaya when they went out of Mitzrayim. This week's Parsha. Boy. And he explains that because the whole purpose is the Kavanah is to make a Dira B'Tachtenim, for Osil Migdash V'Shachanti B'Seicham, the Deir HaShvi of Moshe Rabbeinu, through the Mishkan, as he speaks earlier, Atzei Shittim, the Kroshim, Keresh, to make Sheker of the world, the falseness of the world, into Kroshim, the pillars and that hold up the Mishkan, and all the other details. Who does it? He says it's done by Tzivus Hashem, Tzivus Havaya. Now the name Tzivus Havaya is used on Eden here, that they're the army of Hashem. But Hashem also has a name, Tzvois. And that name is not revealed later, only Chana says it in Tanakh, in Shmuel, Sefer Shmuel. So the Frierdiker Rebbe begins to explain why Tzova. So he first began with two other explanations. That Tzova is from the word beauty, Yefi, and also from the word Yefi and from the word Zman. He brings proof for that. But now he goes to the main interpretation, because that's only the way you do the Aveda. But what is the Aveda itself? Is to be at Tzova, Anshe Chayil, a soldier in the divine army. So why they didn't call it Tzvois? Because Tzvois is the name that Hashem uses when he's Loichem Melchamas. That's the name. The Medrash says that Lefi Maisi Ani Nikra, that I'm called according to my actions, that becomes Ani Nikra, I'm called based on my actions. When God is being Loichem with Rishayim, when he's warring with enemies, that's when he's called Tzvois. So Eden are called Tzivus Havaya because when they're dealing in this world and fighting the Sheker, and the darkness of this Tachtenim, that's why they're called. He brings from the Shari Eira from Rabbi Yosef Giktalia that the name Tzvois is connected to Netzach. Every name, Kael is Chesed, Elikim is Gvura, Havai is Teferes. Tzvois relates to Netzach and Hoid. So he asks why? Because to fight a war, when you fight the war, that's when the king is Mevazbez, he splurges all his treasures. The treasures that were concealed forever. So the deepest resources, the deepest treasures of the Melech are revealed in order, because Nitzachim, to be victorious over an enemy, reaches deeper than all other Keiches HaNefesh. That's what he begins, and there he continues in this chapter talking about that idea of what? Of victory. And that's why the soldiers, who's given these treasures? The soldiers, the foot soldiers, the Tzivus Hashem, are given these treasures to be able to conquer and vanquish any enemy. Okay. The Rebbe in his Maimer in Tafshir Chaf Aleph, both Maimer, explains at length this idea of Tzvois being one of the 7 holy names. Shiva Shemesh Einim Chakim. On one hand, it's not in Teresh in Chumash, it's only by the Nevi'im it's revealed. And the Rebbe goes into the whole discussion about names, the names of God, that on one hand, Lefi Maisi, they relate to God's actions, functions. They don't relate to God himself. Tzvois is when he's fighting battles. Kael is when he's giving chesed. Gvura is when he's sitting bedin, judgment. Every name has its role. But ani, lefimaisi ani nikra, is the other end of it. God himself is called by his functions. So here we have a dilemma. Which one is it? Which is, of course, the big question asked about the Esespheres. We've talked about this many times, and we're talking about it right now as well. Does God relate to existence, or does he not relate to existence? When you say Lefi Maisi Ani Nikra, explains the Rebbe, based on many Maimorim, you're saying both. That God is relating, he's fighting a battle down on earth. He's giving strength to fight these battles, but it reflects on Ani, the Etzem, that's beyond all these structures. In a way, what he's saying here, that the Snasus ala Am, and as he relates to existence, is rooted and connects with his Snasus Atzmi. And the Rebbe goes on to bring three interpretations. The Alter Rebbe said, Motzei Yom Kippur, Tov Kuf Nun Vav, he said a Torah. The Torah was on the pasuk B'chol Kareinu Alav. So the Sifri says, the Medrash says, they love V'leila Midesav. B'chol Kareinu, to all that you call to him, a love to him. V'leila Midesav, not to his emotions, not to his attributes. God forbid. When we daven, we don't speak to God's attributes, we speak to God himself. Children and people who don't know even the kavanas, that's for them a davar pashut. They speak straight to God. They don't know about all these levels. But those that do know the levels, and they're even mechaven, it says in the Medrash that why doesn't God answer prayers at times? Because lo lechaven b'shem, because you didn't say the right kavanah in the Shem. So here comes the big question. If you're praying straight to God, who needs kavanas? Who needs all these giluyim? But we learned at length, you can't get the atzmus without the giluyim, really. A child doesn't have all that because he's not yet developed, so he goes straight. But once you're a developed person and you want to integrate godliness in your life, you need it also on our terms. The whole concept of the interface is that should be on our terms and on God's terms. So he brings three interpretations. One is the Ramak. That's what the Alter Rebbe said. Motzei Yom Kippur. And Tov Kuf Nun Vav. One is the Ramak. The Ramak says that a love, Leila Medesav, means the Eiris in Kalim. Not the Kalim, but the Eiris within the Kalim. So you don't refer to the Midas. The Midas is how it manifests the structure of Kalim. He says the Eiris, we're looking for the godliness within these attributes. That's the Ani, so to speak. The Baal Shem Tov goes deeper, and he says it's the Eiris that are the root of the Kalim. Not the energizer, energize the Kalim, that the energy that makes the Kalim themselves. Like a neshama doesn't create a body, the body has its own root. And that root in Iyu v'garmu echad is deeper than the root of Eiris, because Eiris is Giluyim. To create a Keli, you need even more koyach atzmi. And then the Alter Rebbe says, and the Pirush HaPoshet, Elol L'Leila Medesav, is not the root of the, it's not the root of the Kalim, the Rishimu. It's Atzmus, Nimna HaNimnois. So the Rebbe alludes to in the Maimer, he says, so what the Alter Rebbe is disagreeing? Chaz v'shalom, Chelik al Rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, he would come and say a different interpretation and call it a Pirush HaPoshet and say first the first two and then the Pirush HaPoshet, as if their interpretations are not real, not complete. And also the Ramak, that's the Maimer, the Rebbe just says that he would definitely not disagreeing. It's the deeper Pirush, is the Pirush Pnimi of all the interpretations. But in the year Tavshim and Beis, Yud Shevat, a year afterwards, this is Mem Aleph, this is Chof Aleph. So Mem Aleph was again the Maimer 11. The year Mem Beis, not a year later, 21 years later, I should say. In Tavshim and Beis, the Rebbe speaks about it again in the Sikha after the Maimer, and he elaborates that the Alter Rebbe is not, God forbid, saying a different interpretation. He's saying that when you really want to appreciate, or let's go the other way, by appreciating Api Chabad, the shit of the Ramak, Oyer, and then the shit of the Baal Shem Tov, Kalim, you will come to the Pirush HaPoshet that it means Atzmus. So those that don't know about all these levels, they don't know the Baal Shem Tov or the Ramak or the Kavonis, like a child, Anim is Baal L'Daze HaTinuk, like that Godel that said, I pray straight to, like a child, straight to Atzmus. Fine. But those that do know, you would think that there was a different interpretation. Says the Alter Rebbe, no. When you think deeper into each one of them, you'll come to the fact that that really a love means Atzmus himself. So why don't you just say Atzmus? Because we can't understand Atzmus if you don't go through the steps of first relating to godliness, the Oyer and the Keli. How really the deeper level of Chesed of Elikus is the godliness in it. And then even deeper that the structure of Chesed, the Keli, is also rooted in a love. And once you go through Ishtalshus, like we've been speaking on our terms, you come to realize that real love is like the Alter Rebbe said, Im Chalei Chafatzti, Mili B'Shamayim, is really Atzmus that's beyond everything. So why can't you just jump there? Because as sophisticated, intelligent people, if you jump there, it'll never be internalized. A child or an Amoritz can go there because doesn't have any Giluyim. But if all of us jump there, we really wouldn't appreciate it. It would be nice words. To appreciate it, you have to first internalize a Elikus that relates to you. And then to that which is beyond you, until you can come to a place of Atzmus. So bottom line is, the Alter Rebbe is giving the deeper meaning in all three, in other two interpretations, and also telling us that you need it all to appreciate the whole picture here. The Rebbe goes on there, Membez, he speaks about that this is in halacha even. You see the idea that as much of kavanas you have, and even the Mishkan was built based on Ruchnis, because God showed the Mishkan Hiresa Bahar and showed it in an image of fire. The Menorah, Moshe saw an image of fire, then he built the Menorah. The image of fire is in Ruchnis, in Seder Ishtalshelus. That's the Ramak and the Baal Shem Tov. But the bottom line is you need Ma'aseh Iker, Pirush HaPoshut. You need it to come down into an actual prayer down below that reaches Poshut. It means simple interpretation and also means beyond all definitions. So that's the Ma'aseh Iker in the action of the simple interpretation, you reach the highest level of Atzmus. But that means that, but you really appreciate it when you go through the whole Seder Ishtalshus. And vice versa. Atzmus wanted, like we're learning here, to have a relationship. He didn't just want you to jump to Atzmus. He wanted you to have a relationship. You want a melech and na'am where you can speak to each other and communicate with each other. First, once you have a melech and na'am, then you can come and realize that it's nasus atzmi. So it goes both directions. So I wanted to just throw that in because learning this helps somewhat understand what he says there. There's more to be said. I'll just say one more point since we're already on it. The Kovid Yud Shvat. He brings there the Torah of the Magid. We spoke about the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, the Ramak, Kabbalah. And he says something interesting. He says Kabbalah covers Eidos and Giluim, because that's what Kabbalah is. Yechudim, Shemus, divine revelation, transcendence. The Ramak and all the Mukabolim, their main role was to bring transcendence into the world. Transcendence means to get out of the immanence of our limited existence and reach to the higher levels of godliness. That's Oyer. Oyer teaches you how to go out of yourself and bittul telekus. The Baal Shem Tov came and explained how you find the lakus in every detail, in every leaf, every simple thing. Because there's a lakus in the kalim. Not just go out of the kalim, but go into the kalim and there's a lakus. When you dig deep enough, it's concealed. But in the keli, in every specific thing, you find the divine energy. That's what he says. Achsidus Chabad, the Rebbe says in the Maimer, comes the third level, Atzmus Nirna Menois, because ultimately you cannot. Why from the Baal Shem Tov, from the Ramak and Baal Shem Tov do you come to the Baal Alter Rebbe's word? Because at the end of the day, who connects them? Atzmus is beyond Oyer, Atzmus is beyond Kalim. How do you connect them? So when they speak about in Giluim, in Shtalshlus. But Alter Rebbe says the only way to really appreciate how godliness is expressed through Oyer and godliness is expressed through Kalim is because Atzmus is higher than both, and Nimnam Nimnois, and he combines even opposites. So then he brings the Torah of the Magid. It says about Shem Havaya, Kishem Shani Nichtav, Lo Kishem Shani Nichtav, Kachani Nikra. In today, you don't write, we spoke about this here in Ayin Beis 12, we don't write and read the name Havaya the same way. Havaya is written one way, but we read it, we say Adnai. So the Maggid explained why Dafka that, why? He says, because Adnai, in the world with that Tzimtzum, in Golus, you don't have the Gili Havaya in its fullest sense, because the Gili Havaya would annihilate existence because it's higher than existence. So Havaya has to transmit through Adnai. Adnai is how Havaya relates to existence. We learned it again on the previous page, 1171. Then he said that the Shem means already has a relationship to another. When he asked the question, what's Hoya Shmei Belvad? Which we didn't yet answer completely. Okay, so what happened in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur? The Kohen Gadol would say, Kishem Nichtav Kachani Nikli. He wouldn't say Adnai. He would say Havaya, the Shem HaMeferish. So the Pashta's explanation for that is, says the Magid, is because now on Yom Kippur, when he's Avshotas Agashmis, he's not eating and not involved in material life, like Yom Kippur expects us to be like Malachim. So therefore you can bring Shem Havaya. In the regular weekday, you can't. But on Yom Kippur, you could. Ask the Rebbe, what's the answer? Havaya Shema Etzem, that's higher than Ishtalshlus, higher also than Ruchnius. So just because he's more Ruchnius, that's why you suddenly have Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya is equal distance from Gashmis and Ruchnius. So how does that help explain why the Kohen Gadol could say Shem Havaya? So the Rebbe said the real answer is not because Havaya is the Ruchnius, because now you're a more spiritual person. Transcendence, like in the words of the Ramak. Transcendence, so once you're in a transcendent state, you can reach higher levels. He says no. The reason is because you're reaching Shema Etzem. And Shema Etzem touches Atzmos, reflects Atzmos, and Atzmos is Nimna Nimnois. So Kohen Gadol, even though he's living in this world, and it says that after he leaves the Kodesh Kadoshim, he goes home, and he has to be married, and he has to be a person that's grounded. No, he cannot be a person that is living in a spiritual realm. Nadav and Avihu were consumed when they went up too spiritual, too transcendent. It's because it's Nimna Nimnois Shema Etzem. That's why you can have both elements together. Be in Kalim and still experience Oir, the highest levels of Oir. Kishem Shani Nichtav Kachani Nikra. That Adnai and Havaya become like one, and you pronounce it also Begili. Nikra is Begili. So in a regular day, you can't reveal that higher level of Havaya. But in Yom Kippur, you could, because you have Nimna Nimnois, which is like Kodesh Kadoshim, the Odin Eina Min Amida. Space and no space, all at once. And he brings also from the Magid another Torah, which says Nagid Shema Ovet Shema. So he types as Nagid Shema, that when the Shema Havaya is revealed, you can't have existence. That's why it has to be Ovet Shema. You have to lose the name. You have to, Ovet, he says from the word Siluk Hatzimtzum HaSiluk. God conceals his name in order for it to come into a world like ours. And then on Yom Kippur, we have the power to transcend it all. So the Magid then becomes an interface between the Baal Shem Tov and the Ramak and the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. Because the Magid is already beginning to explain with Havaya the idea of Nimna HaNimnois, which leads to the Elov V'Leila Medeso of the Alter Rebbe. That's the deeper interpretation, that ultimately the goal is not Oir, not Keli alone, the combination of both. I'll just throw in one more thing here. And what's the connection to Netzach? Now that we know this, so how does that connect to Netzach? So it seems that the connection is that now that you know these deepest levels of godliness that are higher than existence, that we can have access to them, because the Shemus reach all the way to a love, and not Midesov, to the highest level of a love of Atzmus. So now that Netzach, which means Tzvois, the name Tzvois, is rooted in these names, all the way in a love. That's why the highest levels of Elikus come down when he fights a battle. So even though it's Lefi Maisi, there's an action, he's fighting a battle, the battles of Golas, the end of Golas, like he goes on in the Maimah say, Kol HaYetzel L'Mechamez Beis David. That's why it's rooted, and you're getting the Bizbuz HaEtzes, the splurging of the deepest treasures all the way from Atzmos, based on this Pirush, that the Shemus are rooted in that place. A love, the Leila Medesav. The Shem is only a reflection of Atzmos, according to the Pirush. So it goes in an order. The Ramak Eiris, the Baal Shem Tov Kelim, the Magid brings together the Eir and Keli, and the Alter Rebbe, a love Atzmos Mamish, Nimna HaNimnois. And one final point, later in the Maimorim, So still the question remains, why Netzach? Then all the names, not just Tzvois, also Kael, Havaya, Elikim, they all are rooted all the way in Etzem. So 2 points I would make. One is, because you see B'Poel, whenever you have more of a managid, an enemy, the more you have an enemy, the more keiches you need. So the other names also are rooted in Etzem. In other words, ultimately Chesed of God also comes from Atzmos. But you don't see it apparent the same way when you have to fight a battle against an enemy. You have to dig deeper. So in a sense, there's more Gili Ha'atzmus in the Tzvois and Netzach, more Eitzer than in the other names. Another point, later in the Maimorim, he's going to speak that what is the Eitzer L'mayla? He says, L'mayla Mayla Aden Ketz, L'mata Mata Aden Tachlis, Eden Sof. L'mayla Mayla Aden Ketz, L'mata Mata Aden Tachlis speaks about how it goes deeper and deeper into existence. The Elokus can be found everywhere, even in the lowest levels. And Mayla Mayla Aden Ketz is Helam Acher Helam, that Elokus is higher and higher and higher. Like he said here, Snasus over Snasus, deeper and deeper and deeper. So therefore, if you think about it, Mayla Aden Ketz, L'mata Aden Tachlis is the root, ultimately, of Eidus and Kalim, of Gili and structure. One is in structure, you find Elokus, and one is Elokus that's beyond structure. However, you can interpret it both ways. So in a sense, when you get to the Alter Rebbe, Ninam Nimnois, the truth is L'mayla Aden Ketz, L'mata Aden Tachlis are all rooted in one Yechelis, A'atzmus, that God can do as he sees fit. And ultimately, they both come together. So if the Eitzer is the level of L'mayla Aden Ketz, L'mata Aden Tachlis, especially L'mayla Aden Ketz, then what you have is, that's revealed, Dafked Lamata, when we are challenged by an enemy, the darkness of this world, we overcome it, that reveals Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu and Atzmus Dir B'Tachtenim. So the ultimate Litzachim, the ultimate root, the ultimate revelation of the deepest levels of Atzmus is Dafkin Tachtenim, because of the Hisnagdus, because of the battles that have to be fought. Not Silus, there's no battle to be fought. It's Hoyel Lehem Yerida Le'Yizbarach. Hoyel Lehem Yerida Hoyel Lehem Le'Yerida Pnei Yizbarach, Me'er Panav Yizbarach. Whereas in this world, the revelation of Atzmus Nimnam Nimnoi is the highest levels, especially when you have to deal with the enemy. Anyway, that's a summation based on some of what we're learning, and I thought it appropriate to add. I know we went longer, but I thought it was good to include into the picture.